Hey folks, Rob here with a bit of a tag response. Wasn't really to anyone in particular. I saw Novabug do it, but a whole bunch of other folks have been doing it as well. Basically, walk through an A to Z of games in your collection. So I thought I'd sit down and pull a bunch of games out and have a quick run through of why I grabbed them. This is primarily C64, just because that's the biggest one and probably the best organized out of everything. So I did throw a couple of Spectrum games in for the mix. There weren't enough letters that I could cover gaps with. Actually, pretty good. I only missed Y in the end. But we'll start off with, a Spectrum one, and this is 3D Star Strike, which of course which I wanted to get my hands on because it's really great interpretation of the Star Wars arcade game. I had the official Star Wars game on the 64. It's nowhere near as good. The 64 really needs specialist programming to do its best job when handling Vector 3D. And Star Strike's actually a little more playable take on it. So it's good to hunt down. I only played it on emulation via Spectaculator on my iPad. But when I get the tape stuff and the video stuff sorted, I'll be able to have a good play of it on the Spectrum too. For A, we picked Aliens, particularly the UK game rather than the US one. I think it's just that the UK one actually has a bit more of an interesting flow to it, being a sort of faux first-person horror, exploration-y game rather than the multi-part adventure arcade sequences of the US release. And I think that sort of builds, the atmosphere works really well with on the 8-bit machines. And it's a very tense game, which I didn't think the US game was, in my opinion. On to B. B shouldn't be much of a surprise, but Battle Command. Really got this as the first time I saw reviews of it, being a tank simulation game that had really fast 3D and also taking advantage of the cartridge, as I think it's the only kart game I included here. Where is it? Where's the actual cartridge? Here it is. Huzzah! One of the few ocean carts, one of the batch I do have. It was the first one I did hunt down, although incomplete at the time, but have it all complete now, and it's a great building on games like Battlezone, but with pretty fast 3D graphics for the C64 and some great gameplay, and one that's on the list to do eventually if I can actually beat a mission. Now on to C, and for C I picked Cybernoid, and yes, that is part of the cassette case sort of flailing about. I have both Cybernoid games on the 64, and the reason I think I grabbed the first one is just easier to pick up. But yeah, they're both the same kind of flick street action, and I really think I think they're great games they were great conversions off the Spectrum. I think the soundtrack is much better on the 64, and not just because of the sound chip, but I think I love the track by Maniacs of Noise a lot more than the music on the Spectrum one, although that has been in my head a fair bit as of late. But it's a great, flick screen blaster that actually adds a whole bunch of challenge in there, despite, being written for limitations of, hardware machines that weren't really good for scrolling. Now on to D, which is Dark Side, which is the second of the Freescape games. And it's a follow-on to Driller, which is the one I'm still looking for. It's the one I did play when I was a kid. But Dark Side is interesting because it builds on a bit of whereas in Driller you're in control of a vehicle as you're exploring. Here you're on foot, and ultimately that gives you kind of a proto first-person shooter experience as you're going around exploring and trying to save the day. I really need to put a bit more time into that and hopefully do a vid of it. And for E, which is actually a bit of a recent arrival, which I haven't actually talked about yet, but Exile. I had to grab this on the 64 because, the 64 is my main jam. I could try and hunt it down on the Amiga or the Electron. I have seen copies for the Amiga. I've not seen copies for the Electron come up, which is surprisingly, as it's an Acorn, being originally on the Acorns. It would have been good, but Exile, of course, is a great sort of arcade adventure with a lot of physics, which makes sense coming from the author. Russ was part of the team behind it. And it was really good to actually hunt this down, although it was a bit pricey. F is First Strike, which is written by the guys who wrote Buggy Boy, and is basically what Afterburner could have been on the 64. It's an excellently fast-paced dogfighting action game with a little bit more depth in there. Really recommended. G, got to hit the simulation component at some point, and for G, of course, it's Gunship. I've always been a bit of a flight sim fan, and Gunship is one of the first really big ones, at least from the US side, to really sort of put everything together in a cohesive package. If you look at the early Microprose stuff, which I've covered, like F-15 and Spitfire Ace, this is sort of builds on a lot of the presentation of that to put like a really grand game. You may not be a fan of the Pomp and Circumstance. It sort of gets a bit old after a while, but it's an incredibly great game to go into. Oops, that was G. I just had a blank out moment there. Finally, for this first lot, I'm splitting this through lots for the sake of the piles on the ground in the landing where I'm recording this. So for H is of course Hunter's Moon, and did a bit of it quite a while ago, but it's a great sort of strategic arcade blaster, and I really love for just excellent soundtrack, good, unique take on a blaster, and a really well put together game. I guess it'll be a jump cut while I grab the second pile. Okay, so H. So for I, we'll start with the first part of, I guess, my Braybrook fanboyism, as Intensity, of course, is his last game, and very unlike his previous work, a sort of more sort of action puzzler in that you're really sort of guiding a ship to collect survivors and getting them out of the stage, but there's a lot of the Braybrook traits in there that make it well worth playing. I just haven't given that the shot it deserves yet. J, the other thing that could come to mind was, of course, Jet Set Willy, or Jet Set Epic Willy if you're a fan of Microman. But I got both of them, they were in a blot, and I'm not the biggest fan, but I think it definitely is a standout game regardless in terms of, what it did for the genre of these sort of flick screen platformers. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan, but it does have its merits. K is Karateka, which is again another sort of milestone in terms of filmic, more narrative aspect of games, and it's a incredibly well put together game, although I'm utterly rubbish at it. L has to be my favourite entry of the Last Ninja trilogy, my favourite entry with Last Ninja 2, and it's probably, just for me, it's the one where the design, the gameplay, the visuals, the music all came together to produce one of the most standout games on the C64. Incredibly well put together and outstanding game. Okay. M probably shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but hey, if you know me, you know the channel. M has to be Morpheus, which is of course the Mega Braybrook game, and the one that gets a bit of a bad rap just because of the extra depth involved with it by comparison. It's not a straightforward game, and I think that turned a lot of people off who were kind of expecting that based on Paradroid and Uridium. And that, of course, is really one of the biggest aspects of that game I really enjoy, that in fact it actually adds a lot more depth to it than just a straightforward blast. For N, I was about to skip a letter. For N, it's Novabug, which is one of the last, I think it definitely was the last Salamis game. I know they were working on something else, and they didn't get that to market. This was like fairly late 92, but it's a rather excellent platform. It's by the guys in Genesis who did like the CJ games and some others. It's a little glary because it's actually still sealed. Yes, I haven't cracked this open yet. I think I just loaded it straight off the Ultimate, but it's kind of cool having another sealed title I haven't popped open. And O is the rather wonderful conversion of Operation Wolf. The only thing that is annoying is that I have a Commodore mouse in the house, and this doesn't work with it. Only the American version works with it. Pardon me. But a frantic first person, frantic light gun shooter. from the arcades, converted really well to C64. The less said about its follow-up, the better. Okay, now I'm going to go grab the last set. Okay, and again, knowing me, knowing the channel, Pete obviously is Paradroid. The original, I couldn't be bothered. The easiest one to find out of the stack in my boxes. But of course, is a great, strategic tactical masterpiece for the 64. Great 64 exclusive, and one that just I could never stop recommending. For Q, I had to go with Quasitron, which is the Spectrum. What started as a Spectrum port of Paradroid became quite a different game. It takes the sort of basic concepts, the clearing droids to progress, but and keeps the transfer mini game, but changes a few mechanics, and it's sort of the stopgap in a way between Paradroid and Ranorama, which I looked at the 64 version of not too long ago. There's a lot of mechanics in here that are echoed in Ranorama later on. Okay, for R, we have none other than Revs Plus, which is one of my favorite motorsport simulators on the C64. It's incredibly well put together racer. It's fast, it's fluid, it's got some great physics for the time, and it's a tricky game, and it's well deserved for being a tricky game. S, one of probably the only lovely gatefold thing I will cover here, but that is Sky Fox 2, which is in all its EA album cover awesomeness. I love the first game. I did a review of that ages ago, and always wanted to get my hands on the sequel because it sort of builds up from what the first game did, takes it into space, has a bit more involved gameplay, and as it's a disc-only release, it actually adds a lot more to the game. I'm not quite ready to do the review of it, but guaranteed it will come eventually. For T, pretty much one of the all-time classics on the 64 with Turrican 2. Big, it's sort of the design, a platform run and gun where that really pushed the C64 to the limits and builds upon what was a great game in the first one, but just turns it up to 11 here. Excellent game, regardless what you play it on. I've gone for, again, something a little different, and that, of course, is Ultima 5. The whole Avatar aspect of things, the whole Avatar, sort of living up to Avatar while trying to, save things. Definitely an interesting thing narrative, and a lot of people have said this is like one of the best of the series, and I've played a couple of the early ones, and I really want to get into that too. I had to include at least one Jeff Minter game, so that's Void Runner. It's not the best of that series. I think Matrix, which is the second game, most certainly is, but it has frantic gameplay, the usual tradition of psychedelics that Minter is known for, and pretty tough little blast. Ideally, I'd love to get a +4 and get the +4 version, just because it uses the colors much better there. Oh, sorry about that. I don't believe I actually forgot W, which in this case has to be Way of the Exploding Fist. One of the first really solid beat 'em ups that appeared on the 64 and other 8-bits, and it's a great, rather challenging, nice for game. And being Melbourne House, I have to do a plug for hometown. WX, it would have to be Rainbow Arts' X Out, the horizontal blast that's set underwater. It's a bit faded a bit, so it's pretty darn solid game. You scroll along underwater. One of the things I really like is the whole most shoot-ups you have lives and you collect your power-ups in game. Here you actually have to arm your ships before you start. So you grab a ship, you arm it, and then you deploy it. You build as many lives as possible. And I think that adds to a very unique aspect of the design. I do need to get to this as well. Despite looking, I actually don't have any games with the letter Y, so I don't have anything to show there. So we'll come on to Z, and that is Synapse. It's a little tighter on the Spectrum than on the 64, but it's still but it's a rather solid shooter regardless. A great horizontal shooter, weird little power-up system, particularly activating it, but it's really good fun, really solid, and one that's definitely worth checking out. So that's everything. That's, well, I threw zeros. I threw numbers in to compensate for not having a Y, but that is pretty much alphabet of a chunk of my collection. Obviously there's a lot more in there, believe it or not, but I think that's a pretty good overview. You know, a lot of actiony stuff, some RPG, some strategic stuff, some Sims. Thanks again for watching. As usual, if you have subscribed, thanks again for subscribing. If you want to, please do. You know, there's one gameplay every week. I will have more gameplays coming up soon. And thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you next time.